There is a type of place in the world that defies any rational definition of possible, a place where human engineering should not work, where aviation manuals offer no answers, where every landing is, in practice, a silent negotiation between the pilot, the machine, and the mountain. These places exist. There aren't many, but they are real. Airports built in valleys sealed by rock walls, on plateaus more than 4,000 meters above sea level, on islands with impossible approaches, on terrain where no engineer in their right mind should ever sign off on a project. And yet, someone built them. Someone looked at that abyss, at that vertical slope, at that narrow valley cut by winds that change direction in seconds, and said, "Let's put an airport here." What motivates that kind of decision? What drives a nation, a community, a government to face decades of impossible engineering to connect a place that nature, by design, isolated from the rest of the world? The answer is rarely simple. Sometimes it is political strategy. Sometimes it is economic survival. Sometimes it is a combination of pride, necessity, and collective stubbornness that transforms the absurd into reality. And when that reality finally materializes, when the asphalt of the runway exists, where before there was only rock and emptiness, the result is not just an airport. It is physical proof that the limits imposed by nature are not final sentences. They are open negotiations for those with enough courage and intelligence to sit at the table. Before we go any further, if you have never heard of Paro Airport, drop a comment right now. Would you have the courage to land at an airport like this? And while you think about your answer, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because what comes next will make you understand why this airport is unlike anything you have ever seen. Among all the impossible airports humanity has ever dared to build, there is one that stands out not only for the technical difficulty of its construction, not only for the rarity of the pilots certified to operate it, not only for the brutality of the environment in which it was installed, but for something harder to measure, for the coherence between the airport and the country that built it. This place sits in the heart of the Himalayas, in a kingdom that for centuries preferred silence to visibility, isolation to integration, contemplation to accelerated progress. A country that does not measure its prosperity in money, but in happiness. A country that charged the world the right to exist on its own terms. Paro Airport in Bhutan is not the highest in the world. It does not have the shortest runway. It is not in the most remote place on the planet. But it is probably the airport that reveals the most about the people who built it, about the choices that people made, about the price they paid for those choices, and about what they gained in return. This is the story of how an impossible valley became the gateway to an impossible kingdom, and it begins long before the first stone was laid. It begins with a political decision that no other country in the world made in the same way, and it ends with a truth about human limits that goes far beyond aviation. But to understand why Paro Airport is what it is, you first need to understand something that most people have never stopped to think about. Why did Bhutan exist in absolute silence while the rest of the world was exploding with wars, revolutions, and forced modernization? The answer lies in a choice made centuries ago, and it will change the way you see everything that follows. While the 20th century tore the world apart with 2 world wars, industrial revolutions, borders being redrawn by force, and entire nations wiped off the map, there was a small kingdom on the eastern slopes of the Himalayas that simply did not participate. Not out of weakness, not out of ignorance, by deliberate, sovereign, and absolutely consistent choice. Bhutan closed its borders with a determination rarely seen in modern history. Merchants did not enter. Diplomats could barely get an audience. The word tourist simply did not exist in the country's vocabulary. It was a kingdom squeezed between 2 giants, India to the south and China to the north, with just over 38,000 square kilometers of mountains, temperate forests, and valleys that seemed to belong to another time. The Bhutanese monarchy, guided by the precepts of Vajrayana Buddhism and a deep distrust of external interference, understood that openness without control meant dissolution, that modernization without purpose meant loss, and that a country the size of Bhutan, surrounded by 2 of the most populous nations on Earth, would only survive if it knew exactly who it was before presenting itself to the world. That isolation was not stagnation. It was a form of active preservation, a choice to keep intact the social, cultural, and spiritual structures that defined the Bhutanese people. while the world outside redefined its own in haste and frequently with violence. But the world, even when ignored, does not stand still. In 1947, India gained its independence. In 1950, China occupied Tibet, establishing a border to the north of Bhutan that had previously been separated by distance and natural diplomacy. The buffer that had protected the kingdom had disappeared. The isolation that had once been a preservation strategy was beginning to transform into an existential vulnerability. It was then that Bhutan's third king, Jigme Dorji Wangchuck, the so-called father of modern Bhutan, made a decision that would change the kingdom's destiny forever. Not an unrestricted opening, not a race into the 20th century, a surgical, calculated, and sovereign opening. Bhutan was admitted to the United Nations in 1971. Strategic alliances were formed with India, and a need emerged that until then had not been put in practical terms. Bhutan needed an airport, not because it wanted tourists, not because it needed mass trade, but because a king who needed to travel to negotiate with world leaders could not cross weeks of mountains to reach the nearest airport, because urgent medical supplies did not arrive in time by dirt roads, because the sovereignty of a small country in the 20th century depended on its ability to show up in the world when necessary. And the place where that airport would be built was, by any technical standard, a geological nightmare that no aeronautical engineering manual had ever contemplated. The engineers sent to assess the terrain arrived with maps and professional confidence. They left with something completely different. What they found in the Paro Valley was a combination of factors that, taken together, made the construction of an airport not just difficult, but mathematically close to impossible. And the worst obstacle was not the altitude. It was not the weather. It was something no instrument could measure. The Paro Valley is beautiful like few places on Earth. It is also a natural corridor between rock walls that rise more than 5,000 meters on both sides, with a river cutting across the valley floor at an angle that complicates any large-scale construction, with winds that climb the slopes and descend compressed through the valley in unpredictable gusts, and with a microclimate that can turn a clear morning into an afternoon of dense clouds in a matter of minutes. To build an airport there, engineers would have to simultaneously solve 4 problems that, anywhere else in the world, would each be enough to end the discussion on their own. The first was altitude. At 2,235 meters above sea level, the air is significantly thinner. This means aircraft engines must work harder to generate the same thrust. Wings need more speed to generate lift. The plane takes off faster, lands faster, and consumes more runway than it would at sea level. An aircraft that lands in São Paulo in 100 meters of distance may need 2,500 meters or more in Paro. And the runway available in the valley, after all possible earth-moving work, would be one of the shortest operated by international commercial aviation in the world. The second problem was the geometry of the valley itself. There is no room for a standard straight-line approach. There is no way for the pilot to align with the runway from a distance, stabilize the trajectory in a straight line, and descend gently. The rock walls make that physically impossible. The pilot would have to maneuver inside the valley between the mountains while descending, a maneuver that existed in no standard commercial aviation manual. The third problem was logistical, and in the mid-20th century it was possibly the most brutal of all. Bhutan had no paved roads. It had no electricity across most of its territory. It had no construction industry, no heavy machinery, no workers trained for large-scale projects. Every bag of cement, every ton of asphalt, every piece of equipment would have to be transported along mountain trails on the backs of mules and human workers in a logistics operation that defied any civilized deadline or budget. Construction began in the late 1960s and was almost entirely manual. There were no cranes. There were no excavators. There were men and women from nearby villages carrying stones, moving earth with shovels and hoes, leveling the ground inch by inch under the cold Himalayan sun. The original runway, built by the Indian Border Roads Organization from 1968 onward, was only 100 meters long. Every meter of that strip of asphalt had to be perfect, because there was no margin for imperfection, and there was no second chance if a plane overran the end of the runway. Construction took years, and when the runway was finally ready, when the small stone and wood terminal had been built in the style of traditional Bhutanese architecture, the question arose that the engineers had strategically left for the end, because they had no answer for it while they were building. Who, exactly, would be capable of landing a commercial aircraft in that place? The answer created one of the most exclusive categories in world aviation, and the number of people who belong to it, to this day, fits inside a single bus. Fewer than 50 pilots on the entire planet are authorized to land at Paro. It is not a course you complete over a weekend. It is a process of months, requiring a set of skills that conventional aviation simply does not train. And the maneuver these pilots execute on every landing has a name that says everything about what it represents: the curve. Understanding the curve is understanding why Paro is not just difficult, it is unique. In the vocabulary of commercial aviation, there is an unwritten but universally respected rule. Visual approaches in high-complexity environments are only performed by pilots with specific training for that specific environment. At Paro, that principle has been taken to a level that has no equivalent at any other regular international airport in the world. Certification to land at Paro is not a line on a resume. It is a category of its own. Today, fewer than 50 pilots on the entire planet hold that authorization. For an airport that receives regular international flights from Bangkok, Singapore, New Delhi, and Kathmandu, that is a number that borders on the absurd. It is as if only 50 surgeons in the world knew how to perform a procedure that international hospitals offer every day. The certification process begins with months of observation and study of the valley. The candidate pilot flies as co-pilot with certified captains, studying every detail of the approach, every slope curve, every wind behavior across different seasons and different times of day. Then come the simulations, then the supervised flights, then the final evaluation, which includes executing the most complex and most characteristic maneuver at Paro, the curve. The approach to Paro Airport is made from the east, following the valley. At a certain point, the pilot identifies a series of visual landmarks, specific trees, bends in the Paro River, a slope at a particular angle that only those who know it can recognize, and then executes a curve of nearly 45 degrees, descending simultaneously to align with the runway. This curve happens at low altitude with 5,000-meter mountains on all sides, without navigation aids that support an instrument approach. Only the pilot's eyes, muscle memory, and judgment accumulated through hours of study of that specific valley. In normal conditions, with good visibility and winds within parameters, the curve is described by certified pilots as demanding but manageable. In poor conditions, with low clouds, crosswinds, or reduced visibility, it becomes an operation that no uncertified pilot would attempt, and that even the certified ones know their precise limits. If conditions fall below certain parameters, the flight simply does not land. It returns. It tries another day. This operational reality has a name in Paro's vocabulary: go-around. At conventional airports, a go-around is a routine maneuver, a 15-minute inconvenience. At Paro, it is an operation that demands exceptional nerve and precision because climbing back up means gaining altitude between 5,000-meter mountains in a confined space, with engines at full power and a margin of error measured in meters, not kilometers. There is another rule that defines Paro's operation and that exists at no other international airport in the world. When daylight disappears, the airport closes. There are no night landings. There are no instrument approaches in zero visibility conditions. The airport is strictly VFR, which stands for Visual Flight Rules. It is a limitation that seems primitive in a world of radars, high-precision GPS, and automatic landing systems. But it is an honest limitation because the geometry of the valley, the characteristic curve of the approach, and the presence of obstacles that change apparent position depending on light conditions make any technology meant to replace human vision still insufficient to guarantee safety. The Himalayas created Paro, and the Himalayas still set the rules. But there is something that goes beyond engineering, beyond the pilots, beyond the curve. Something that transforms Paro from a difficult airport into a philosophically unique one. Bhutan is the only country in the world that replaced GDP with another indicator as its official measure of progress. And that replacement has direct, concrete, and surprising consequences for every decision the government makes regarding the airport, including how many people are allowed to land there. In 1972, Bhutan's fourth king, Jigme Singye Wangchuck, in the first year of his reign, made a declaration that the economics world would take decades to take seriously. Gross national happiness is more important than gross domestic product. It was not a slogan, It was a formal state policy, with measurable indicators that included psychological well-being, community vitality, cultural preservation, good governance, sustainable use of time, ecological diversity, and health. And this philosophy has direct and concrete implications for Paro Airport, because every decision about expanding the airport, about increasing the number of flights, about allowing new airlines, passes through a filter that no other country in the world applies. Tourism is the most obvious example. Bhutan charges a sustainable development fee per night of stay that, in 2023, was set at $200 per night. Not to get rich, although the revenue is significant, but to limit the number of visitors, to ensure that tourism is high value and low impact, to protect communities, monasteries, and ecosystems from an invasion that would destroy exactly what makes Bhutan special. Paro Airport is, paradoxically, both the country's gateway and the guardian of its limits. The physically limited capacity of the facility, 2 or 3 flights per hour at most under ideal conditions, functions as a natural filter. There is no way to do mass tourism in Bhutan because there is no way to bring enough planes for mass tourism. The impossible geography of the airport became, without anyone having planned it that way, one of the most effective defenses of Bhutanese cultural integrity. There is an image that practically every visitor to Bhutan describes upon arriving through Paro Airport. After the landing, after the impossible curve, after the roar of the brakes, after the heart returns to its rhythm, they walk out through the terminal door and stop. They stop because there, 500 meters from the asphalt runway, hangs a monastery on a cliff 200 meters high. Paro Taktsang, the Tiger's Nest, a Buddhist monastery dating from the 17th century, built in a position that by any rational standard would be inaccessible, clinging to the rock as if defying gravity, painted white against the gray of the stone and the dark green of the pine trees, literally hovering above the valley where the airport was built. The juxtaposition is not accidental, or rather, it is not accidental that it touches so deeply those who witness it, because that is, in essence, the story of Bhutan, a country that maintains seemingly impossible things, not despite everything working against them, but because of a human will that refuses to accept limitations as final. Paro Airport cost decades of effort. It cost solutions that had to be invented because they did not exist. It cost the formation of a category of pilots so exclusive that fewer than 50 people in the entire world are part of it. And what did it bring? It brought Bhutan to the world without destroying what Bhutan was, on its own terms, in its own time, with its own measure of success. Every morning, when conditions allow, a plane descends in a curve between giants of rock and ice, touches the asphalt, and brings another handful of human beings to the only country in the world that measured its prosperity not in money, but in happiness. The impossible becomes merely very difficult, and the very difficult, with enough time and intelligence and courage, becomes real. If you made it this far, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because the next video is going to be just as impossible as this airport, and I don't want you to miss it. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment in this video that surprised you the most? The airport itself? The pilots? Bhutan's philosophy? Let me know, because that helps me understand what to bring you in the coming weeks.